On this broadcast, we are going to be talking about how to plan an online tour for your Kickstarter launch. And to do that, I have an extra special guest. So I think this is going to be one you're really going to enjoy. Happy New Year, everybody. This is Tyler James with Comics Launch, and I'm really excited to have you back. And this is the first interview that I'm doing for a brand new year of content for the Comics Launch community. So if you are a writer, artist, creator, publisher, interested in building audiences and launching awesome projects to them on the Kickstarter platform and beyond, this is your show. Joining me today for this very, very cool topic about how you can dive into a online promotional tour for your product, which is great for the pandemic era, which seems to be sticking with us for at least a while more. I'm really excited about this. So my guest that is joining me today is an assistant professor at Michigan State University, where he teaches the comic studio courses there. He's also spearheaded the development of an interdisciplinary comic art and graphic novel minor between the art and English departments at his university. He also serves as the director of the Michigan State University Comics Forum, which is an event for scholars and creators and fans that's been running since 2009. He also has a lot of podcasting experience behind the mic. He hosted and produced the MSU Comic Art and Graphic Novel podcast for 4 years. An accomplished creator and cartoonist himself, he's a 5-time Small Press and Alternative Comics Expo prize winner. His books have also garnered a Ringo Award nomination, and he's been a cartoonist in residence at the Cartoon Museum, Art Museum, and a visiting lecturer at other prominent places. His credits can go on for a while because he's been in this comics game for a long time. Welcome to Comics Launch, Ryan Claytor. Great to have you here.
Tyler, thank you so much for having me. It's you're in my ears every week. It's nice to be on the show here.
Yeah. Well, excited to have you for a focused interview, and also, not just an interview, but you're going to get a chance to share some of your teaching chops, because you have a great topic to present to our audience, and I know they're going to get a lot out of it. But before we dive into that, I did want to bring up what is a very special I think personal and passion project for you, which is called The Hunter's Tale. You launched it just in a few days into the new year on Kickstarter. It's already funded and going strong. What can you tell us about the project that you're launching right now?
Yeah, so if people want to check this out, they can see it at www.ahunterstale.com. That'll take you straight to the Kickstarter page. But this is running throughout the length of January 2022, and it launched on New Year's Day. I was a little afraid of how that would work out, but it worked out pretty well, as you can see. Fully funded right now, and working our way towards some stretch goals, which were just announced this morning. And the project itself was actually originally a poem by my late grandfather, Charles Kermit Claytor. And he is no longer with us, but this body of his work is. And this poem called A Hunter's Tale has resonated with me for a very long time. He wrote this in 1983 when I was 3 years old at the time. And every time I read this poem, I just get stopped dead in my tracks. And, it's this story about these two seemingly really disparate subjects, a hunter and his prey, and how they form this unlikely understanding of one another. And I don't know about your relationship with poetry, but mine is virtually non-existent. And the poems that I have read feel like you have to sort of read them and reread them and decipher them in order to understand what's going on. My grandfather's poems were not like that. They were very narratively driven, very visually oriented. I feel like I've been able to see this poem in my mind's eye for a very long time, and I've always wanted to collaborate with him on this, for lack of a better word. But it wasn't until recently that I felt like my cartooning chops were kind of up to that task of living up to these words that my grandfather wrote. So now I have done that. In fact, I have you to thank for some of this, because about 6 months ago, I had started work on this, and I was in your pop-up mastermind, with Jamie Dillon, and gosh, I'm trying to remember who all was there. It was Rob Multari and George O'Connor and DP Brown and yourself
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
Jamie.
I remember that being a particularly good session. Just great energy in that group.
Yeah, and there were some really poignant words said during that affected me over the past half a year and really altered the course of how I was creating. One of
Mm.
them was from Jamie, and she was talking about this multi-potentialite theory and how you can either approach a bunch of different projects. Well, I should probably rewind. My problem was I have too many projects. Help. What do I do? And Jamie was saying there's a couple of different ways to approach this. One is like an octopus. You can have your hands in a bunch of different things and do a little bit of one project here and a little bit of the next and so on all throughout the day. But if you do that, you've got to be really great at time blocking. And when I stood back and looked at myself, I don't think I am awesome at time blocking. So
Mm.
she said the other thing you could do is treat this like a phoenix, where you just super focus on one project like a laser and work on that until you are done. And over the course of the past 6 months, that's what I did. I made the difficult decisions to put a bunch of projects aside and really focus on this one. And now, after 6 months of working on this, here it is on
There it is.
Kickstarter right in front of us. And
Yeah.
I'm so proud of how it's turned out. So, first of all, Jamie Dillon, thank you so much. I hope that everybody will go check out her work. And secondly, you, Tyler, were talking about context switching that day and saying that, even if you are sort of doing that octopus method, which, we all have to do to some degree, whenever you switch projects, moving from one to another and another, there's this lag in refamiliarizing yourself with that new project and getting back into it. And time is lost when you do that.
Yeah.
And the more projects you do that with, the more time is lost throughout the day. And so I had a tracking system of making this book, and I was, I don't know, maybe about a third of the way through it and averaging about a page every, I think it was like 10 days or so.
Mm.
And after that mastermind session, that time dwindled to about a page every 4 days.
Wow.
And that's like, I'm trying to remember the exact numbers, but I remember it was cut into about a third. So maybe it was
Mm.
like 12 days I was averaging a page to start with. So anyway, all that to say, thank you for the mastermind session that I was a part of, and your helpful words too. So
Yeah.
again, it's
And
great to be here.
it is great to be here. Dwayne watching live said he remembers that broadcast and it was a good session. Yeah, thanks. Glad you got something from that. And it is really great to see. And the other thing I think that you've probably seen with this project, as you start picking up that pace on that momentum sort of has its own weight and its own power to keep you propelling to that next page and the next thing. Where, as you know, I've found when I'm taking on too many projects, sometimes I will let something sit and get focused, and it's still like on the back burner, but it might go from being a back burner, something that I'm doing once a week, to once every 2 weeks, to wow, it's been that long since I picked this up again.
Right.
Wow, where does the time go? And that doesn't happen on when you do sort of focus. And that's not to say that all those other projects that aren't worthy projects or aren't something that you will still accomplish. But I think there's real power into getting this thing out in the world. And at least, and now you're starting 2022 on, a real, I think, creative high note and a visible high note. And that's really what the focus of today's broadcast is going to be about, because to honor the work and the focus that you've been putting in over the past 6 months since that mastermind session, and it's now ready to be produced and put out into the world. You've also committed to, for this launch, really going out there and talking about this project and making it as visible as possible. And so, today's topic is going to be a great one for a lot of the creators out there who, during a launch, I know they wish they had more options to be visible, but maybe they don't have a big budget for, or want to, scratch that, like bang their head against the fake Facebook ads, or they don't want to just keep posting the same stuff on their social media channels. They're really trying to get in front of new people and get people out there. And what you're going to share today is a strategy to do just that, which is called the online tour. And so what I'd like you to sort of just break down for us is, what is an online tour, and why was this something that you were keen on doing for this project?
Sure. So I'm going to rewind just a little bit in my history.
Yeah.
I've done a few in-person, in-store signing tours for my books as they've come out over the years. I've done about 4 major tours where I've hit anywhere from a dozen up to 50 stores or museums and libraries and different places where I've signed my books as they've come out. And those have been really gratifying and really fun for me after a project is out to really celebrate the fact that there's something new out in the world and here it is, check this out. So um, that has happened over a number of years, and now I've signed my books in all 48 contiguous states and over 100 comic book stores at this point. So obviously this is something I like to do, or I wouldn't keep doing it. So first of all, I wish I could do an in-person signing tour right now. I just don't feel comfortable going out and exposing myself in this pandemic time. So I was actually listening to another podcast when I got this idea to do an online tour that then turned into this harebrained scheme of, well, maybe I can talk to somebody every single day of my campaign. And so I started really early. And, it's kind of interesting. I wrote an article about in-store signings and doing a tour. And there's a lot of parallels to making this an online tour rather than an in-person tour. So initially, you start this whole thing by deciding on an amount of time. Like if you're doing this in-store signing, you can't do it forever. So like, do you have a weekend, or is there a week vacation, or do you have a summer break from school, depending upon what stage of life you're in? Figure out a finite time that you're going to devote to this. And once you do, then start contacting people you're familiar with. Like, your local comic book store probably knows you from going in there and purchasing things. For this online tour that I was doing, I have a friend who runs the website soulrad.co. It's the online comics literary magazine. And I approached him really early on about not only this book that I was making, but also this crazy idea that I had to do this big tour, this big online tour. And so he was one of the very first people to interview me about this project. And at that point, I had somebody to point to for everybody else that I went to from that point on. I said, well, I'm already being interviewed by people like Soulrad and Comics Launch and so on and so on. So then I could name a couple of people or stores or websites or podcasts to sort of add some validity to what this was. Because when you're approaching people very early on, I started planning this like 5 months ago. That's really early. It's like saying to someone, hey, in half a year, can you broadcast a thing we talk about, right? Like that's crazy, right? Yeah. So you got to get some anchors before you start going out and cold pitching people on this. So I got
So I want to just stop you there, just
Sure.
to highlight a couple of key points. Is first and foremost, this is something that a detailed tour like this is something that should be planned ahead and in advance, and is you didn't just wake up 3 days after your Kickstarter launch and be like, oh, I should really try to get on Tyler's show right now, or I should try to get all of these people to start talking about me. And I do know that there are some creators that like maybe a little bit gun shy about talking too much about their thing in advance, or like because they're worried about spoiling stuff, or they might also sort of feel like, well, if I reach out to them and then I actually for some reason can't hit my deadlines and have to launch later, that would be the end of the world. And so like, did any of that sort of resonate with you, or have you been in this enough to know that what you really need as a creator is that prep time in advance?
I thrive on prep time, but what you were saying actually does
spoken
resonate,
like a true educator.
But one of the things you mentioned that does resonate is shooting for a particular deadline and then not hitting it. For
Mm.
example, this book that I was creating, I was originally thinking that I was going to launch a Kickstarter in the month of November, starting November 1st, going to the end. And it became quickly apparent that I was not going to be able to hit that deadline, one, for the book, and two, for creating a tour like I wanted to. So pretty early on, I came to that realization and I called up whoever I had talked with already, which at that point was not a lot of people. But I said, hey, I know initially I thought this was going to be in November. I'm pushing this back to the first of the year, going to do it in January. Are you okay with that? And everybody was fine. So just being communicative and transparent is super helpful.
Yeah, and one thing I can say, just as someone that uh, I teach systems, I proselytize systems, and part of the reason I do all of that is because I am by default not a systems and terribly organized person. My desk, I organized my desk right before I closed out my things for the end of the year, and here it is, January 4th. I've worked all of one day this year, and my desk is already a complete mess again. So I need systems to thrive, and so as someone that is also a destination on Ryan's tour, I really appreciated how organized and communicative and to the point, and he was with his emails and his communication. Makes it really, really easy to book him as a guest and to be excited about talking to him when I do. Okay, yeah. So that is a big thing, planning in advance. And then the other thing that I just wanted to call out was how important it is to like put some definition around this idea of a tour, right? And I think and so like yours is pretty ambitious, 31 days, 31 stops. But I would say, like, for someone that was trying to think about doing a tour, like, that doesn't have to be your thing. Like 3 a week could have been a goal and a worthy goal and still had impact. But by putting a framework around it, that gives you something to shoot towards, it then I think may also help you with, okay, well, if I want to get 31 days and 31 stops, this is my target. I know I'm going to have to reach out to probably more than 31 targets, or I'm going to have to, like, it sort of sets the scope of the amount of work that you're going to put in going into it, to try to get that result or create that result. So I wanted to flag that. And then also the other thing that I really did want to flag was the importance of seeding your launch concept with some friendlies, some easy asks to get the easy yeses to point to, so that you sort of change the dynamic for the person that you're asking from, do I want to do this person a favor, to, do I want to be a part of this event that this creator is going to happen? It also sets the expectation that this isn't something that, is a wishy-washy thing. This is inevitable. Do I want to jump in? And that's a similar sort of approach or attitude, I think, that really works on Kickstarter. There is not the degree to which a creator needs the funding has no impact on how well the Kickstarter will do. In fact, it kind of works the opposite way, where, the degree to which backers are confident that this book is going to be awesome and is going to happen whether I'm in part of it or not, actually encourages more backers to jump in. And so by seeding it and reaching out and getting some early yeses from people that you have an existing connection with, is definitely a place the place to start with this, right? So, okay.
Yeah, so like you said, start with people you know, and that makes it easy on you too, because it's a pretty sure thing that if you're walking into a store that you're familiar with, or somebody online that has a blog or a podcast that you're friendly with, they're probably going to tell you yes. And again, that just adds to your street cred. And like Tyler was saying, it makes it so that they're not doing you a favor, but they want to be a part of this thing. So I was asking, hey, do you want to be a part of this tour? I would love to feature you on this, big thing that I'm doing. And people were accepting mostly. But like Tyler said, you've got to account for the no's as well. In fact, you see 31 stops in 31 days on that tour card, but I contacted way more people than that. I was contacting everyone from comics podcasts to online magazines, but not just in comics. I was trying to think about other related things like this is a poem. So I was reaching out to poetry podcasts, English departments in schools. I'm also a part of pinball communities, watch communities, neon communities. I create artwork for each of these communities. So I was reaching out to them as well. So you'll see gaming podcasts and watch websites and things like that, where I'm trying to reach out to a much wider audience than just the comics community. So I would also encourage people to think about what else are you involved in outside of comics and how might you leverage those communities for your project? Because if we're just speaking to the same comics community over and over again, you've kind of got a ceiling to what you can reach on Kickstarter. I am a huge proponent of Kickstarter, maybe second only to Tyler, because there is really a community built up on Kickstarter, and Tyler's highlighted it on his show numerous times that you look at people who are launching on Kickstarter and they're not just going there for a quick money grab. It's like 5 launched, 75 backed, or 90 backed, or 100 campaigns backed. So it is truly a community. And if you look at other categories on Kickstarter, it's not the same. Like you go to tech and you'll see somebody launched 1, 0 backed, and like that just leaves kind of I don't know, a bit of a bitter taste in my mouth when I see that, when people are just there for their thing only and not interested in being a community, which the comics community on Kickstarter really has become.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about this concept of stops. All right. 31 days, 31 stops. And it seems like you sort of have a sort of a broadish definition of what quote unquote counts as a stop. And I think similar to online, or similar to in person, where, well, sure, an in-store signing would count, a convention would count as a stop, a panel at some sort of gathering, could all count. So what were the major categories of different stops? And obviously, the Comics Launch podcast, where this will end up being on our January 9th episode of the Comics Launch podcast. So Comics Launch is your January 9th destination. And sometimes with creators that have live projects on Kickstarter, we like to sort of double dip by doing a stream event in advance. So you're getting a little bonus one for today with our live stream, but this will also, our official stop is on January 9th, which is the Sunday that this will usually air. So a podcast is obviously one example, but what are some other things that sort of are counting towards your online tour?
Sure. So in my mind, a stop for this online tour was an interview with me talking about ahunterstale.com.
Yeah.
And that can take form in many different ways, from a text interview. There's a bunch of online magazines where we typed via email back and forth, and then they publish it on their website. There's audio interviews, like for the Comics Launch podcast. There's video interviews where we will get on StreamYard like this, and then it's broadcast at a later time. And there's even live streams like, well, Tyler and I are doing right now, but there's a few of them that are designated live streams during the tour. So those are the 4 main categories that these interviews took shape. And it's just like the internet. There's a bunch of different ways to do things. So I didn't want to limit it to I'm only doing text interviews, or I'm only doing audio podcasts, or I wanted to open it up. But I tried to keep track of that in one of those lines of that big matrix to let you know, okay, here's a set of headphones. You can understand that you're going to be listening to this one. Here's a big T, so this is a text interview, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So another question I have for you in terms of is just sort of, what does the research project of this look like? I think most creators out there can name the 3 to 5 podcasts that they listen to, or the 2 to 3 websites that they go to. But the idea of coming up with 31 stops might be kind of daunting for them. And I'm guessing that even though you've been in this game for a long time, that you didn't just off the top of your head have 50 to 60 places that you could reach out to so that you could fill your dance card.
Right.
What did that look like for you?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And you can probably relate to this. The fact that we've been around comics for, going on 20 years at this point, a lot of the media outlets that we know of are not around anymore. They change
Absolutely.
pretty
Yeah.
frequently. There's not a ton of money in comics journalism. So it's not surprising that they don't stick around for 5, 10, 15 years. So there was a lot of research on my part. And I did everything from combing the internet to talking to my friends saying, hey, do you know of any media outlets that I could speak with about this project that might be friendly to this? So I've got a friend named Don Wynn. You can find him at winningit.com and on social media. He pointed me to probably about 10% of the media outlets that are on my tour right now. So there's one example. I also started going around Kickstarter. And I know another thing that you've taught in the comics launch courses are to get some media proof, like where have you been featured? What podcasts have you been on? What interviews have you done? And I looked around a number of different Kickstarters that had those on them. And they listed a bunch of media podcasts, internet magazines that I did not know of. So I just went to those websites and started combing them and seeing, okay, well, where's the contact information? Send them an email, solicit a possibility for what they might be interested in doing. And like you said, I contacted way more than 31 people. I probably contacted in the neighborhood of 60 to 80 different outlets before I, as you said, filled my dance card, got those 31 stops.
Yeah, yeah, and you put together a great graphic, which sort of definitely makes it all seem real, and that you were able to do what you set out to do, which is awesome. So that was great to see that as well, and to be featured on there. Much appreciated that.
Yeah, that graphic is something that I feel like is almost necessary in order for anyone besides the creator themselves to understand what this thing is, because
Mm,
it can be, it doesn't have to be, it can be really big and overwhelming. And if you say, hey, I'm talking to a different media outlet, every day of the month, that's like a quick mention. But if you see it in front of you, it's like this overwhelming wall of, hey, look at all this stuff that's organized around this project. This is a big deal. You should go look at this. So I think that graphic, any tour graphic, is really helpful. And for every tour I've done, I've made a similar type of graphic for that.
yeah, I love that, and I think it also is very helpful, especially for creators that sort of do their Kickstarter and have the usual, and you're going to have this with a 31-day launch. You're going to have hopefully a strong open as most, and then things are going to slow down, and what starts as a rush of backers becomes a trickle. But as the creator, that there's this weird thing that happens where, like, we sort of believe our own hype and feel great, can feel great about ourselves after in those first couple of days, and feel unstoppable and amazing. And then somehow by day 7, it's like, did everybody forget about us? Am I invisible? Does nobody love me? Like, even though you're still getting, backing and the numbers going up, it's just like, it just shows how quickly humans normalize success and then think of anything that isn't the high points that they've had. Well, that's a threat. But what having this full schedule, a slate of media appearances on cue as deck, is that, so you can say to yourself, oh, well, I'm not done. In fact, right now you're not even, you're not even a 10th of the way there, just or like a 15th of the way there, in terms of what's going to come out. And so, you have a lot more stuff coming, and this thing can grow as it goes. So I think from a mindset of the Kickstarter creator, having something like this set up in advance can make it make the campaign's highs and lows and ebbs and flows a lot more bearable. So, and I'm hoping you're finding that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the big perks of this is that it gives me something to talk about every day, even if there's a low point in the campaign, even if nothing happened, if there was no backers, I don't have a stretch goal to talk about. I have something to say. Hey, today over on comicslaunch.com, over on soulrad.co, over on wherever it happens to be, I'm going to be talking about this project today. I hope you'll join me over there.
Yeah.
So something is going to be mentioned every single day, and it's something different. Like, it's not just, hey, go to my campaign, please, please, please. It's, sort of forming my month for me.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. And then this all becomes additional content that you can share with your backers. And I think backers also really appreciate it, where, hey, we're coming to this project because this looks, decent or whatever, but there's no backer that will ever back us that is more invested in our projects than we are. But the fact that you are going out there and not only did you make this thing, but you are actively pursuing and trying to make it as visible as possible, that reinforces a backer's decision to back you, because backers want to support creators who are not only making books that they like and projects that they want, but also creators that care and that are passionate about the thing that they want. Like, they need to know that you believe in your thing, as in order to want to believe in it with the form of a pledge or donation. And so, in terms of a backer retention strategy, that's what this also can do for you. So, I just think that's a great thing, and there's just a lot of additional benefits to this. All right, I want to go back to the planning of this. What did you feel you needed to have prepared in advance? I guess before reaching out to the targets on your list, and then in the lead up to it, to make it as easy and as productive and as valuable for both groups, in terms of when these things actually drop.
Sure. So I wanted to have a particular amount of the book in the can done by the time I contacted somebody. So I had 8 pages inked when I was contacting the first folks on that list.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, I'm working on this project. Here's an excerpt of it. I'm hoping to launch in November. Then it was January. Now it's January. So this first few folks got a little bit of a different date. But to have a plan, hey, here's my plan. The book is well on its way. I have a launch date and a number of different venues for the tour, and I'd love for you to be on there as well. So essentially, I had a bit of a pitch. It wasn't just the tour, it was the book. It was proof that the book was being made, and they were pages that, honestly, I was quite proud of, and I showed them to them, and I think that helped with the pitch. So that was really what folks received, and then a conversation would start from there.
Mm-hmm.
And about a third of the time, I would get a confirmation, and then we'd work out a date for when they could be slotted into the tour. And then you've got that graphic in front of you. But I would like to emphasize the fact that you don't have to start with a 31-day back-to-back sequential day tour. Like, that is crazy town. I've done a few tours before, so
Yeah.
I felt like I sort of led up to crazy town, but I would not start with that. In fact, like I said in the beginning, you can start with a weekend or a week or just a few days out of the month and still call it a tour. They don't have to be back to back to back days in order to call it a tour. I just wanted something to make a huge splash on this project that I am so gosh darn passionate about. This is so near and dear to my heart. I really want to let a lot of people know about it, because I want my grandfather's work in more people's hands. So I wanted to make a big deal out of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, do you have any pro tips for reaching out to those cold contacts? It sounded like one of them was, you had your initial wave of getting yeses from some friendlies who you were okay with reaching out at an earlier stage with less done. And so my guess is that one of those is you can maybe wait a little bit till you get a little bit closer to and have more of a more polish and some existing people that are in the can there for you and have it planned. But anything else that you want to add to that in terms of reaching out to cold audiences?
Probably the biggest tip there is to have some folks on board already to kind of get your street cred with that cold call, with that cold email, so that the person on the other end of that sees, oh, okay, there's buy-in to this already. This, as you say, is happening. So do I want to be a part of that? Is it really easy for me to be a part of that? I tried to make it easy for people who were willing to give me a yes, to say, well, these are the days I have available. This is how it's going to work out. Here's the tour graphic. Here's a highlighted portion with yours on it. Really trying to make it easy for them so that they feel like, oh, okay, I don't have to do a lot of work in this. So yeah, I would say biggest thing, get some a couple stops underneath your belt that you are familiar with first, and then use those in your contact to say, just like Soulrad, just like Comics Launch, just like whoever you've got already, I would love to include you in my tour.
Yeah. Now, another question that I think creators might have is, and especially they've been on this for a while, and they might have like a media list or people that they send advanced reviews things to. Is for your outreach, were you doing personal outreach, or were you sending sort of a bulk email to a number of different outlets?
No, no,
And
no,
if
no.
you were personalizing, how were you personalizing?
Every single media outlet I contacted was a personal email. Sure, there was a bit of a template in, describing the project itself, but I researched every single media outlet, meaning I knew a first name that I could contact. I knew an actual email that I could solicit. I mentioned their podcast or their website in the email itself so that it did not sound like a carbon copy email to a bunch of folks, because that just spells, death for trying to cold call people.
Yeah.
So I really did do research on each and every media outlet before I sent those emails.
Yeah. And then I guess this is something that I think trips up a lot of creators when they say, well, there's 250, 300 Kickstarter projects on the platform at any given time in the comics category. Like, why would any of these places want to talk to me about my Kickstarter comic? What,
Because
and what's the answer to that? And then let's assume that most of them aren't terribly interested in their Kickstarter project. What options do you have then?
all right, so why would a media outlet want to talk to you about your project, I think was your first question.
Yeah.
And you, creator person, have already answered that in your Kickstarter story. You should have a purpose for your project. You should understand why you are putting this out into the world. Why is it important? I think my project is important because it is this timeless tale of empathy. These two seemingly totally separate subjects to find an understanding of one another. And to top it all off, my grandfather wrote this. My grandfather's not with us anymore. I wish he was, so he could see this collaboration between he and I. But that makes it special as well. So you have some special elements to the project that you are working on. What is that? You are excited enough about it to spend hours and days and weeks and months of your life to create this thing. Tell us about it. You tell me, why is it so interesting? And when you're passionate about it, then that person on the other end of the line has a much greater possibility of being passionate about it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. And that is something that a lot of times people will point to me, some really, projects that have great art or seem to be an interesting concept or are like other projects that have done well on Kickstarter, but they might be struggling. And a lot of times that why, the big why behind that project is missing. And when it's missing, you'll miss it. And especially in terms of when it comes to media outlets, a lot of them are going to be more interested in the personal, or at least as interested in the personal aspects, the story behind the story of the thing that you're creating, and the creator behind it, and what drives them. When you think about actors and actresses that go out there and talk on their movie promotions tour, what percentage of the time on the show, on those talk shows with Jimmy Kimmel or Jimmy Fallon, are they talking about the plot of the comic or the plot of the movie that they're in, or the specifics of the movie, and what percentage is human interest, fun, like fun stories, and what drives that person? It's definitely weighted more towards the personal and the unique hooks of that. So I think that's something that we should all consider, and not be so wrapped up in the plot points of our project. Yeah. Travis Gibb, who is another person that's very prolific out there in the world of Kickstarter and Kickstarter promotion and launching. He's very impressed with your tour, Ryan. Great job.
Thank you, Travis.
So I know you're going to be inspiring a lot of creators out there to maybe just get a little bit more aggressive with reaching out and putting out there. And what about the fear of rejection? Because I know that is something that a lot of creators may have, and also, so that's one question. What did you have any fear of rejection, of having people respond negatively to your requests, or giving you or slamming a door in your face? Or is this point are you hardened against that?
Gosh, I grew up a younger brother, and so I had an older brother who was constantly calling me names and spitting in my face and
get out of my
me on the ground. Yeah, so I feel like I've had enough slings and arrows where it doesn't affect me all that much anymore. With all that said, my brother and I have a very fine relationship now. So hi, bro. But yeah, I don't feel like that affects me so much, because otherwise I wouldn't have gone through 80 different contacts to get these 31 that you see in front of us right now. You've just got to sort of understand that there's a law of percentages at work here. Just like when you're sending out an email, you send it to 1,000 people and maybe 100 open it, and then 10 will click on it. It's like you have to understand that there's this dwindling amount of people who will accept what it is that you're doing and be okay with that. Yeah. So as you've preached on this podcast many times before, that just means you need to reach more people. So yeah, I don't know. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. No, I think it definitely is. And it makes me also think that another piece of wisdom that I've definitely kept in mind over the years is that the fortune is in the follow-up. And I'm curious, did you have any follow-up plan with either people that you didn't hear back from, or the people that seemed receptive but maybe non-committal? To what extent did you track that, or did you follow up, and did you find that, well, hey, maybe some of these ones that I was able to book, it wasn't an instant automatic one ask and everything was taken care of?
Certainly. Yes, there were for sure follow-up emails. And one of the things that I didn't get to in the tour planning that was so necessary is to have a spreadsheet. So not only to track store name, phone number, email, contact info, but also like notes for every single place that I contacted, saying, contacted on September 21st, 2021, said to call back September 25th, called back the 25th, X person wasn't there, call back again on the 30th, that type of thing. Because otherwise, trying to keep track of all that in your mind, it just cannot happen. So then when I would refer back to, okay, what am I doing this week? Who am I contacting? Then it's all right there in black and white, and really easy to follow up with people and say, hey, just checking in again. I know you said to call you back about this tour thing, seeing if we can work this out. So yes, I would say make a spreadsheet first and foremost. Add a section for notes that you can add any individual, like contact the manager, or what is the manager's name, or when should I call back again? But then also for those follow-ups, like you were talking about, yeah, I mean, half of these wouldn't have happened. Half of these tour stops in front of us wouldn't have happened if it weren't for follow-up emails.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Um, Now, uh, another thing that I want to point out, and I want to credit Ryan with, at least as far as for myself and and for the Comics Launch podcast, is and I'm sure this definitely helps that you're a listener, a longtime listener of the podcast. But Ryan made it really easy for me to say yes to him because for a couple things. One, he reached out in advance, several months in advance. Sometimes I have to, turn down requests simply because I try to book and plan my podcast at least a month in advance. Sometimes longer than that, but usually not that much longer than that. So he reached out in advance. So it's not like I could say, sorry, all booked up 6 months from now, Ryan, you're out of luck. Unless, and if I do say that, I must really not want to talk to him. But the other thing that Ryan did was he recognized that, the project that he's launching is something that is always color for the topics that we discuss on the podcast. But Comics Launch is not a review show. We do not sit up there and talk at length for hours and hours about an individual Kickstarter project from a product standpoint. What we instead, our focus and our commitment is to the comic creator out there who is trying to learn something that they can implement and take action on, and that will help them with their own launches. And so, Ryan knew that. And to the extent that he reached out, he provided actually a couple of, I think you provided actually 3 possible topics for the podcast. And the first one was actually, so we got a little bit meta, but he was reaching out to me to be a part of his tour, and the topic was to do a tour. But I actually hadn't done an in-depth podcast on the online tour, I think, in a long time. And so I wanted to, so that topic jumped out at me as something that was very actionable and appropriate for the audience and for the podcast that I do create. And obviously, a byproduct of bringing great value and sharing that stuff is that he gets to talk about this passionate project that it means so much to him. And that is really the win-win attitude that creators who reach out to me to be on my podcast, when you go above and beyond, hey, Tyler had me on the podcast, or hey, can I come talk about my book? That it makes it really, really easy to say, heck yes, Ryan, come on. This is going to be, I know this is going to be extremely valuable for my audience. And so I'm curious, like, did you have to sort of tailor options for every outlet that you reached out to, or and how was your approach to how you could make sure that you're honing in your offer to be on their platform to make it as valuable as possible for them?
Sure. So the larger platforms, and I would consider Comics Launch to be a larger platform. The larger platforms that I approached, I was more familiar with. Like, I listen to your show every week, and I've heard you talk quite a few times. So I knew that this is not a review show. It's not an advertise your Kickstarter show. This is a more on the ground, nuts and bolts, how to help other creators type of podcast. And so I had a hunch that you would want to talk about this tour thing. I wanted to talk about this tour thing, but I thought that you might too. But in the back of my mind, I thought, well, if he's not into this, I don't want it to be a quick no. So that's when I said, well, we could talk about touring, or B, or C. Yeah. But your choice, man. I'm ready to talk about whatever you want. So for the larger venues that I'm more familiar with, yeah, I was able to more tailor that pitch to the folks that I was not as familiar with. I would do my best to familiarize myself with their website and understand how they were approaching this, so that I could say, oh, okay, I'm going to be on an entrepreneur podcast or a small business podcast, so I might pitch it toward that. Or on a comics podcast, so I'm going to pitch the book itself, or whatever it might happen to be. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And I will say that this is also a great thing that works when you reach out to artists or other people to collaborate. I remember, when I reached out to Cesar Feliciano way back when to see if he'd be interested in working on a book with me. I knew the book that I wanted him to work with me was called The Red 10, but I also pitched him, 3 or 4 other ideas that I just wanted to up the chances that he'd be down to work with me and collaborate with me on something, and so that definitely helps from an artist perspective. Even if and it also makes it clear that you are someone that can come in and add value in a lot of different ways. So thinking about that really does put I think your application or your inquiry to a higher spot on the list of potentials, and will increase the odds that someone gives you a yes.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I would also like to pull back the curtain a little further and expose some of the seedy underbelly of touring, which is as tour stops are approaching, just like you said, when you're launching a Kickstarter, nobody is more invested in this thing than you are. Everybody else, it's pretty darn peripheral.
Mm.
Same thing with touring. If you're going to in-store signings or even an online tour like this, it's good to check in pretty close to when you are going to chat with someone, show up at their store, etc., and just say, hey, just touching base, making sure you're still expecting me on Wednesday. Looking forward to our chat. Just to put yourself on their radar, because if you're going into a comic book store, they are doing comic book retailer things, which probably don't include the typical, touring. Like that's like off their radar. So if you remind them, then they're going to say, oh, that's right. Expecting you at my store on Wednesday. Can't wait to see you. Or I was about to email you, Tyler, when your email came through saying, hey, see you tomorrow. I literally had the email typed and I was going to say, hey, looking forward to our chat tomorrow. And here we are. So Tyler beat me to the punch. But all that to say, I have actually showed up to stores around the United States or an online interview of some sort, and the person was not prepared. We had, agreed upon a date and time and place to make this happen, and we were there. But in the example of an in-store signing, I showed up and an employee was there, but the manager who I scheduled with wasn't, and just didn't tell the employee. And they're like, oh, I don't know. I guess you can go find a table in the back if you want. And like nobody was around, so that didn't work out too well. But if I had called them in advance, just a couple days or a week before, and checked in, things would have gone much better. And so now that is something that I add into my routine. In fact, I just went through this week's tour stop appearances and checked in with everybody, and everybody's on board. And if I did not do that, I would wager there were a few folks that either did not post our interviews in time or, what have you. So check in with people a little bit before, even though everything is already set in stone. You are the only one who chiseled that in stone, nobody else.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. And as much as I pride myself in professionalism, I can say, like, I probably showed up late or in some cases missed more sort of interviews or pre-scheduled meetings or things this past year than ever before, because with COVID and daycare switching and all of the nonsense that's going on, and just a brain that is pushed to the limits, it's easy for non-routine things like some of these interviews or specialty specially scheduled things to be the first things to fall through the cracks. Even if I have it on a calendar or backups, like it's happened. I don't feel great about it, and I feel very apologetic to it. And so I would also say don't take it personally if your Kickstarter podcast or interview appearance is not the top item agenda on for anyone else on the planet. Yeah, I wouldn't take it personally, and just roll with it, and be proactive about making sure that you stay on their radar. I think that's a great tip. Well, we're coming up on the hour here, and so I want to close the things. Is there anything that we missed about an online tour? Anything that you want to, final words of wisdom for creators that are considering doing one of these?
Um, yeah, the last thing I would mention is to be grateful. Whoever is having you in their store, they are giving up valuable retail space for you to feature your product. Whoever is having you on their podcast or online magazine or YouTube channel, they are devoting their time, their life to featuring you. So whenever you're done with a signing or an interview or what have you, just make sure to be grateful. And on that note, Tyler, thank you so much for everything that you do for the comics community. I feel like you have a big part in why comics are so successful on Kickstarter right now. Like I was talking with Oriana Leckert. I have her in my uh, advanced comics class at Michigan State University to speak to my students not long ago. And she was giving this presentation about how comics campaigns have been so successful recently. You know, they started out around the 50% mark. And then in 2020, they jumped up to like high 60s, I think. In 2021, in September, when she came to my class, she said they were tracking to be way higher, like even into the 70s percentage of successful campaigns for comics campaigns on Kickstarter. And, you know, you've been educating the comics community for the past 5 years with your podcast and your programs. And I just want to say, not only thank you for having me on the show, but thank you for helping to build this comics community. I don't know if anybody has publicly said that to you, but I want to make sure that it is publicly said. I think you are doing an incredible service to the entire comics creator community. So thank you.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that, and I received that, and yeah, I think I get, I definitely am grateful for the acknowledgement that I get, and I'm also just grateful to play a small role in the actions that all of the creators that go out and hear something on this podcast, and then they go and take it and run with it, and then so many of them are gracious enough to sort of come back on the show and share how they, put a strategy to use, put their own spin on it, got great results, and then they feed it back to it. It creates this, just continuous, reciprocal, value ladder that is, I think, been a big part of powering the success of these comic projects on Kickstarter. And so, I'm glad to be a part of it, and I'm glad that you're a part of it as well. And I know, you're someone that's been educating the up and coming next generation of comic creators for years as well. So I appreciate all that you do and all that you shared here today. The book is called A Hunter's Tale. It is a comics poem that was written by Ryan Claytor's grandfather, and now it is in beautiful sequential art form and available on Kickstarter, and will be up there throughout the month of January. Thank you so much, Ryan, for sharing all your wisdom with the Comics Launch audience today.
Thank you, Tyler.
All right. And for everybody watching and tuning in, let us know when we can catch you on an online tour sometime soon to promote your comics and graphic novels, because Ryan and I can't wait to see what you launch next. Take care, everybody.